Long ago, this channel went by a different name. You see, it wasn't always about city skylines. Before Grunstadt, before Edbrook, hell, even before City Skylines Speed Build Part 1 itself, I had a different obsession. Yeah, maybe it's not that surprising. I was 13 when the first Five Nights game came out. In fact, I had an entirely different channel before the one you're watching this video on, and one that was completely inundated with FNAF content. If you've ever been involved with the FNAF community, then you should know that the subreddit was, and in many respects continues to be, the hub for the FNAF community. Any new teaser would be posted at 500% brightness within mere seconds of going live. Even Scott himself would occasionally make posts and comments addressed to the community on the subreddit. It really was the place to be. And so what does a 13-year-old who wants to be part of the community do? Well, he makes a Reddit account with a vaguely FNAF-related name. Something like, "Is it me or not?" And then maybe, just maybe, he then titles his new YouTube channel as an acronym of that name. Yeah, FNAF was a big part of my life 10 years ago. So much so that when the hype around FNAF 3 had died down, and it seemed like the trilogy was complete, I decided to make a post. 10 years later, only blank left. The title was a play on one of the teasers for the game. 30 years later, and only one left. The trilogy was complete. Or so I thought. Either way, I felt that I was ready to part ways with the series. The idea of the post was pretty simple. If I was leaving, I assumed many others would be as well. I figured the post could act as something of a time capsule, presenting the opportunity to look back and reflect 10 years after the fact. Despite how cringe and naive the post is in hindsight, I think that the sentiment at its core still stands. 10 years after the original trilogy ended, where is the franchise now? In this video, I look back on the first 3 games and the questions that they pose, as well as how they were answered by the games that came after. I discuss, in my opinion, the shortcomings of the story, and present the narrative that I believe the original trilogy was trying to tell. Before delving into the successive games, it's important to first understand why so many people genuinely did consider things to be done after FNAF 3. Of course, everything began with Five Nights at Freddy's 1. I'm sure everyone here remembers how it swept over the internet.
Hello everybody, my name is Markiplier and welcome to...
I can still remember seeing that first video by Markiplier in my recommendations as it blew up and all the others that came after it. Tons of people have dissected every detail of FNAF 1 already, but I think what made it special was how original it was. At the time, horror for me was scary movies with something chasing the protagonist through some dark corridor. The idea of just sitting there in your office with almost nothing at your disposal to protect yourself was a novel concept. The environment, the characters, the sound design, all of this came together in perfect balance to produce a very solid game. But of course, nothing can be credited for the success of the game as much as the story. It's ironic considering the state of the plot today, but ask anyone and they'll tell you that the story was what made FNAF what it is. The mysterious hints scattered around the game and the theories they generated were the catalyst for practically an entire genre on YouTube, not to mention it being perhaps one of the largest motivations to continue releasing sequels. To be quite honest, I couldn't tell you what exactly about the story it was that hooked me. I think that the first game had 5 mysteries at its center. Who was the murderer, and why did he perform the murders at Freddy's? Who was the perpetrator and victim of the Bite of 87? Who is the one saying, "It's me"? Who is and what is the significance of Golden Freddy? And of course, who is the player, Mike Schmidt? When you look at these questions objectively, they're not exactly groundbreaking. Does it really matter knowing who the killer was or which animatronic perpetrated the bite? Whatever the answer, the hype around the game just made the story that much more alluring. One thing that newcomers to the franchise don't understand is how intense the hype was when everything was just starting out. FNAF 1 released on August 8th, 2014. FNAF 2 released in November, 3 months later. Not years, months. People weren't even done obsessing over the first game. Hell, the fan games were only just beginning to pop up when Scott came out with the second one. I can't describe the energy in the community. You had to be there. It was electric. It was the first time I had ever been so excited for a game, and sharing that experience with an entire community made it even better. What's interesting to me about FNAF 2 is that, looking back on it, it feels much more like a founding entry rather than a sequel, like a part 2 rather than a game 2. I think this is partly due to how quick it came after the first installment, but also because of how much new information it introduced. I've always maintained that FNAF 2 was a great successor to the first game. Not only did it get the Best the Living Tombstone song, but like any good sequel should, it took what made the first game great and expanded on it, while still being original enough to be a standalone installment. The gameplay was very different, substituting the doors for a mask that only worked to deter some animatronics, and a flashlight for the others. Of course, the puppet was the star of the show. It was such a different character to the rest of the cast, and the first to have that time pressure behind them. Story-wise, FNAF 2 blew it wide open, and almost to an iconic degree. It was this game that gave us the first minigames, the crying child, and finally gave the community something to call the murderer, Vincent, the purple guy. Notably, however, the sequel didn't answer any questions from the first game, instead generating many more, a common trend we'll see going forward. It was FNAF 2 where the theories exploded, and people were in disagreement about everything. Are the toy animatronics malfunctioning, or are they haunted as well? How many kids were killed in total? What was the previous location that the withered animatronics were from? What was and what happened to Fredbear's family diner? Why is Golden Freddy's head severed? Who are the players, Jeremy Fitzgerald and Fritz Smith? What is the yellow suit that Phone Guy mentions? Who is the crying child? Who is and what is the significance of the puppet? Who are and what is the significance of Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie? The list goes on. It's this environment that made game theory and channels like it so synonymous with FNAF. Amidst all these questions, having something of a quote-unquote authority figure come in and present their thoughts to what was ostensibly an impressionable teenage fanbase was incredibly influential. Still, even with the growing mystery surrounding the story, FNAF 2 was a success. The community was continuing to grow, and so was the popularity of the franchise. With the fan games and videos continuing to pour in, it was easy to keep this momentum going in the 4 months until the next game. At the pace the games were releasing, nobody really knew what to expect. Would there be another game? Would it be the last? FNAF 3 has something of a unique reputation in the community. Taking place 30 years after the events of the first game, you play as the security guard for a horror attraction, Fazbear's Fright. Whereas the previous 2 games had set you against an entire cast of animatronics, in FNAF 3 you are antagonized by just one, Springtrap, an old spring lock suit that allowed it to function both as an animatronic and a wearable costume. These suits are a new piece of lore that wind up, pun intended, becoming crucial to the story, beyond just this game.
Right now we have 2 specially designed suits that double as both animatronic and suit, so please pay close attention while learning how to operate these suits, as accidents, /injuries, /deaths, /irreparable and grotesque maimings can occur. To change the animatronics to suit mode, insert and turn firmly the hand crank provided by the manufacturer. Turning the crank will recoil and compress the animatronic parts around the sides of the suit, providing room to climb inside. Please make sure the spring locks are fastened tight to ensure the animatronic devices remain fixed. Remember to smile, you are the face of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza.
The purple guy, the man who had murdered all the children, had actually become trapped and died inside Springtrap. Effectively, in FNAF 3 you are playing against the main antagonist of the entire series. A major part of FNAF 3 is the mini-games hidden throughout. Some of these can be quite convoluted to get to, and if you miss certain minigames on specific nights, you aren't able to attempt them on later nights. The Night 4 minigame, for example, requires you to input a code on a region of tiles in your office as if it were a dial pad. This contrived nature of accessing the minigames frustrated a large part of the player base, especially since properly completing the minigames is a prerequisite for getting the quote-unquote good ending of the game. More on this later. Another major criticism was the jump scares. The animations for Springtrap aren't very sudden, and I think that people had gotten much more used to the gimmick by the time the game came out. The phantom animatronics, characters that can scare you but not kill you, did have the classic jump scares, but because they could occur multiple times a night, they ended up being desensitizing. All of these things combined left a weaker impression on players compared to the previous two entries, particularly for those who were invested in the series more for the gameplay than the story. It's a shame, because I always considered FNAF 3 to be the best game out of the entire franchise. If I could make my case. For starters, it was the first time one of the games had an actual ending, and one where it wasn't just the protagonist getting fired from the job. The game had two endings, a bad ending where you complete all the nights normally, and a good ending where you complete all of the minigames. FNAF 3's story is all about providing peace and closure to the victims haunting the animatronics. In the minigames, you take the form of different characters to present crying children with cake. By doing so, you invite them to a birthday party where the 5 souls haunting Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Golden Freddy are set free, in addition to the puppet, who presumably is the one who orchestrated this. I get why people got frustrated with the minigames, but I thought they were charming. I think the way the minigames were presented is exactly how Easter eggs like that should be hidden. It's secret and absurd, the kind of thing you'd think was fake if you heard it by word of mouth. I love that. It's a lost art. Even putting all of these things aside, FNAF 3 actually doesn't leave us with many questions. There are just 2. Who is the player, and what is the sister location mentioned by Phone Guy? Think of everything we do learn though. We know who Springtrap is. He's the killer. The premise of the horror attraction is explained in detail, and so are the concepts of spring locks and safe rooms. Most of the new information we learn is explained within the same game. Sure, it doesn't answer everything from the previous games, but it doesn't pile up much more on top. In my opinion, FNAF 3 was a great addition to the franchise. It's a beautiful ending that gives closure to all of the main characters of the series and enacts justice on the central antagonist. It's the perfect point at which to end things. Can you hear them? Can you hear the bells calling? Five Nights 3 had come and gone, but the community was still there. There were so many questions still left unanswered. As the legend goes, Scott was left unsatisfied with the reaction to the third game. At the end of the day, he still wanted FNAF to be scary, to bring back that sense of terror the first game had elicited in hundreds of screaming YouTubers. And so, a little under 5 months after FNAF 3, FNAF 4 was born. On Steam, the game is pitched as the, quote, last chapter of the Five Nights at Freddy's original story, end quote. FNAF 4 takes place in a child's bedroom. Instead of monitoring cameras and vents, the tension in this installment comes from running between the doors on either side of the room, listening for signs of nightmare animatronics. The game is paced by minigames between each night where you play as a crying child, tormented by his older brother in a foxy mask. Each night counts down to a mysterious party, later revealed to be for the protagonist's birthday. The party takes place at Fredbear's Family Diner, the very first location. But as shown throughout the minigames, the protagonist is terrified of both the animatronic characters and the restaurant in general. The brother and his friends force the protagonist into Fredbear's mouth, who promptly bites down on his head. The crying child later dies after beating Night 6. Despite jump scares being a consistent trope throughout the games, Scott has always managed to provide a unique and original premise for each entry. FNAF 4 is no exception, and is a rather big departure from the previous 3 games. The game doesn't take place inside a restaurant or even a commercial setting, but in, presumably, your own home. A major difference with FNAF 4 is that story events are depicted more or less directly. Rather than cryptic, symbolic minigames like those in FNAF 2 and 3, the minigames in FNAF 4 seem to represent real events through the eyes of the protagonist. Moreover, the minigames include actual dialogue through which the story can be communicated. But despite having a direct way to provide exposition, it's FNAF 4 where the story began to spiral out of control. Beyond learning about what happened at Fredbear's Family Diner, Purple Guy being a confirmed employee is the only tangible piece of information we learn with regard to existing questions. So few questions are answered from the previous games, but so many more are introduced. Who is the crying child? Who are the crying child's parents? Who is or what happened to the crying child's sister? What did the crying child see to make him so scared of the restaurant? Who is and what is the significance of Plush Fredbear? What did Plush Fredbear mean when he said he will put you back together? Was that the bite of 87 or 83? Are Fredbear and Golden Freddy the same? What is in the box? The box. That fucking box. Upon beating Night 7, you are shown the box. Except you don't have the keys. It can't be opened. It stays that way, locked forever, with the message that perhaps some things are best left forgotten forever. I can't tell you how infuriating the box is to me. To this day, it continues to be the single biggest atrocity of all of the FNAF games. And this box right in front of you, which is supposed to provide the answers to the increasingly complex story, is the note that FNAF 4 chooses to leave you on. Seeing the first teasers for FNAF 4 was the first time I can remember feeling a little annoyed, and critical reviews of the game seem to share a similar sentiment. Reviews of the first game are very positive. Critics praise the game for its innovation, not depending on overused slasher tropes to scare the player. Reviews dip slightly for the second game, but it is still generally well received, with both users and critics citing the increase in difficulty. Things hold steady for the third game. The critic score actually increases by a little, but as expected, the user reviews are in shambles. Critics seem to like the new mechanics, but we also get the first sign of jump scares becoming a worn-out scare tactic. FNAF 4 takes a nosedive. I'm particularly drawn to the reviews by Nick Rowan for Destructoid, because he seems to have had a very similar experience to mine with the series. In his FNAF 2 review, Rowan writes, "I was worried that another week at Freddy's would be too much too soon. And it almost is, but it is also charming in its own creepy way. In the end, Five Nights at Freddy's 2 managed to win me over on the strength of its personality, but hopefully we'll get a long vacation before our next shift." Rowan is more critical of the third game than I was, sharing the common opinion that the minigames were too convoluted. Like an incredibly tedious onion, there are layers and layers of mediocrity to peel through before revealing a bitter and unpleasant core of truth. In some ways, Rowan writes, Five Nights 3 represents the best of the series. This is by far the most technically proficient and mechanically satisfying installment yet, striking just the right balance of pressure, jump scares, luck, and skillful management of the tools provided to make it through the night. Sadly, it is also the least personable entry in the series, dumping the little touches that were so endearing about the original titles and getting mired in self-indulgent minigames with little payoff. People who have followed the Fazbear saga up to this point will likely want to close out the story, and they'll find enough to enjoy about Five Nights 3 to make it worth their time. But when it came to FNAF 4, you can sense the frustration through his words. You don't need to play this game. The story, the ongoing mystery of Fazbear's Pizzeria, and the strange goings-on surrounding it are best left to your personal headcanon or favorite fan theory. You'd be better served experiencing Five Nights at Freddy's 4 the way it was obviously intended to be enjoyed, by going on YouTube and watching some 25-year-old, dressed like a 14-year-old, scream and cry his way through the game like a 7-year-old. Obviously, Nick Rowan is one man, and his experience isn't true to that of everyone else's. Many players enjoyed FNAF 4, even more so than FNAF 3. But either way, his reviews are representative of the growingly tired player base, especially when it concerned the story. I bet you thought I'd skip over FNAF World, didn't you? Somehow, while still maintaining the same release cadence, Scott Cawthon managed to produce a full FNAF-themed RPG with all 40 characters from the previous 4 games. It was one of the few games I actually tried to play for myself. But if you've been following along with the franchise in some capacity, you probably already know that FNAF World was an abject failure. So much so, in fact, that Scott removed it from Steam and later re-released it as freeware. FNAF World is strange, to say the least. The mothballing of the game and the effect this had on its existence is extremely apparent. Unlike the other FNAF games, which, despite the clouded underlying story, at the very least have a comprehensible premise, the same can't be said about FNAF World. There are no plot summaries, no competing factions over leading theories, just a multitude of endings and a splintered collection of interpretations. I find it a little bit sad, to be honest. To me, FNAF World seemed like an earnest attempt by Scott to return to the RPG-style games he clearly enjoys making. Games like Iframoon and The Desolate Hope, which didn't see the success he had hoped for.
One part of it was just that, there's only so much that you can let your mind focus on, murders and tragedy and stuff like that. Before you kind of start cracking, even if it's just stories that you're making up, there's only so much human suffering that the human mind can sit around and think about.
Scott stepped outside of the comfort zone that is the typical FNAF game structure, and he immediately got punished for it. The game was too ambitious for its own good, and should have had more time for development, which Scott himself has stated.
No, the one thing I would change, I wish I could go back and have one more shot at FNAF World. I really, really do. If I had allowed myself to work on it for one more year, just like really double its development cycle and let it be a high-res game, I bet it would have really been something. But like I said, who knows? Maybe for the sequel someday.
And in hindsight, what I should have done is, I should have used that for a troll game, or I should have, made something like, Foxy Fighters. I should have just done something that was obviously for fun and not tried to somehow tie it in to a canon game.
Scott wanted to create a fun spin-off in the franchise, but in attempting to connect it to the main plot, he further fractured the canon instead. FNAF World's legacy is, in many ways, the opposite of Five Nights 1. Whereas the first game had all the pieces come together in perfect balance, the pieces in FNAF World seem to assemble in the wrong way and at the wrong time. After FNAF World came Sister Location. Although it's the first title to not be a direct numerical entry into the Five Nights series, it is, for all intents and purposes, FNAF 5. Sister Location still feels weirdly recent to me. I had to do a double take when I realized it's been 9 years since it came out. In Sister Location, you play as Mike, an overnight technician at Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals. Every night, you venture down into a deep underground facility, performing tasks on various characters as instructed by your hand unit. You face off against a new group of titular animatronics: Funtime Foxy, Funtime Freddy, Ballora, and Circus Baby. Sister Location really stepped up the production quality, and I think it's for that reason that, to me, it feels so recent. It stands out as the defining entry in the second generation of FNAF games. It expands on the movement mechanic in FNAF 4, having the player crawl in between different rooms. The environment is more elaborate, and it's the first to feature a full cast of voice actors. Every night has a different premise with new tasks, which keeps the gameplay fresh and original while maintaining an engaging progression. I need to clarify that the title for this section of the video, The Spiral, is specifically referring to the story. I think Scott has done an excellent job of making every entry feel different and like an evolution of its predecessors. It's the story that consistently pays the price. Sister Location is unfortunately no different, with the story continuing to unravel. We do learn some critical information. Purple Guy, and the designer of the animatronics in this entry, is a man by the name of William Afton. We play as his son, Michael Afton, the older brother we see in FNAF 4. And the crying child's sister and William Afton's daughter was killed by and possessed Circa's baby. But for every one of these questions answered, more are created in its place. When do the events of Sister Location take place? What happened to Circa's baby's pizza world? What suit is the player stuck in on night 4? Why are the locations from FNAF 4 connected to the Circus Rentals facility? Why are cameras monitoring the FNAF 4 locations in the private room? What is the significance of the Fredbear plush having a walkie-talkie? And is Michael Afton Mike Schmidt? And this continues even with the 6th and last mainline entry into the series. What is Remnant? Why does Springtrap look so fucking ugly and stupid? I fucking hate him. What is the significance of the Candy Cadet stories? What is the secret grave in Midnight Motorist? Where did the boy run off to in Midnight Motorist? Whose footprints are visible in Midnight Motorist? Who was the intended night guard? What is the significance of Jeremy and Fritz on the gravestones? But, credit where credit is due, Scott once again stepped up the quality. The gameplay loop is new and original, splitting the game into a tycoon during the day and the classic point-and-click at night, while still keeping the two intertwined. It's funny as hell, the visuals look fantastic, and by God, that ending speech is iconic. Say what you will about it becoming a joke, but man, Scott knows how to make an ending feel powerful. For once, through all these games, some part of the story is communicated directly to us. We learn that the Cassette Man, Henry Emily, William Afton's former business partner, his daughter was killed by William Afton, finally giving more context to the minigame in FNAF 2. It was her who went on to possess the puppet, and she was the one to guide the other spirits. We also learned the name of William's own daughter, Elizabeth, the one possessing baby. It's a cathartic moment, but you have to think about it. Why? Is it just because of the production, the grand speech, and the music to go along with it? Or does it just feel so good after how long we had been strung along? I would end it there, but I feel that I would be remiss to not include Ultimate Custom Night, since it is essentially an appendix to the series. UCN is a true return to form. It's made specifically for those who enjoy the point-and-click gameplay, and especially the more ridiculous side of that. Still, UCN manages to introduce even more uncertainty into the already frail story. Who was the one you should not have killed? What is the significance of Chica being the first one killed? How does that fit into the timeline? And what is the significance of the Golden Freddy cutscene? But there aren't any more answers. With Scott's decision to depart from developing more FNAF games in 2021, UCN became the last to be developed solely by him. There would be no more opportunities to elaborate on the story from within the games proper. UCN becomes what FNAF 4 claimed to be. The final chapter, at least for this era of the franchise. The game is over. It should go without saying that UCN was not the last entry into the franchise full stop, but it was the last of the main series produced by Scott himself. The franchise has continued to grow with more official titles and media beyond the games themselves. There's a lot to cover, so let's knock these out a little quicker. I'm lumping all the books into one category here for simplicity. I remember reading The Silver Eyes and its sequels when they each came out and moderately enjoying them. It was a nice change of pace to experience the story directly, rather than scattered across 8 different games. Despite them not being canon, Scott did specify that the books do have many elements in common with the games. The first Silver Eyes book released in December 2015, and was presumably being written as FNAF 3 was getting developed. As more and more games released, I think it became pretty clear that a lot of what transpires in the games was borrowed from the books, notwithstanding Scott's statement. To me, it always seemed like writing the books helped Scott figure out much of the story that may have just been loose interconnected pieces before putting pen to paper. I never read the character encyclopedia or the survival logbook, or the week before for that matter. I see them quoted a lot in contemporary discussions about FNAF and its lore, but to me, committing to reading them seemed like a lot of effort for a franchise I was already disillusioned by. The Silver Eyes books I could at least understand as a separate entity, even if the line between them and the games did blur over time. But the encyclopedia and logbook specifically always felt a little third-party to me. I couldn't be bothered to read any of the Fazbear Frights books either, but my understanding is that they're fairly well written, and similar to the Silver Eyes, also contain parallels to the story in the games. As much as I appreciate FNAF reaching a wider audience with a higher writing standard, I think that the books did introduce a lot of confusion and misdirection with regard to the lore. If Scott had said explicitly that the books are a separate canon and to completely disregard them when discussing the games, that would have been a done deal. In retrospect, acknowledging the parallels wound up further diluting the fact pool, with members of the fanbase in arms about which plot points are analogous to the games and which should be ignored. I thought Help Wanted was a fun and well-made game. I'm not a huge fan of Glitch Trap and didn't care much for the story, but I did appreciate that apart from the exact meanings of the endings, you could piece everything together without external context. Help Wanted 2, on the other hand, feels mostly forgettable. It seems like Steel Wool opted for more of an arcade-style set of games, rather than placing emphasis on some kind of driving plotline. I did not play nor watch any gameplay of Special Delivery. I always thought it was pretty disconnected from the franchise, but I was surprised to see it actually cited in some discussions about the lore. Supposedly, some of the animatronics are part of the blob at the end of Security Breach, but whether or not that has any significance, I'm not so sure of. Security Breach was a big deal. It was the first full game since Pizzeria Simulator, and Steel Wool's first attempt at doing so. To say the reception was mixed would be a bit of an understatement. I thought the premise was very fun. The new animatronics are unique and have a lot of personality. And the idea of exploring a massive Fazbear branded pizzeria complex like this is super cool. In practice, the execution was a bit spotty. By far, the biggest criticism of the game is how buggy it was on release, and it was really disappointing that it was allowed to be published in that state. It felt rushed. You'd have all these great set pieces with beautiful art and gorgeous environments, and even if you managed to make it through the bugs, they felt so loosely connected. Things kind of just happened. It was a wild goose chase to get one security badge after another, and you were just along for the ride. Somehow, the curse that had haunted so many FNAF games before it had returned for Security Breach. By all accounts, Vanessa and Vanny are the same person, but why then do we see her in two places at the same time during one of the endings? Why is the TV room from FNAF 4 here? What are Gregory's motives? And of course, they couldn't help but bring back William Afton. It felt like such a cop-out, like the whole story was crutching on the same villain who had already been killed off 3 times at this point. The rushed nature of the game is especially noticeable during the endings, where, ironically, most of Security Breach's predecessors had excelled. The weirdly low-resolution blob of Molten Freddy, the very awkward feeling and strangely paced cutscenes, or the otherwise out-of-place comic strips that very obviously replace animations that couldn't be completed in time. I don't think it's a failure of a game. It's difficult to not sound pedantic when clearly there was so much potential and so much love put into the game. It's frustrating. Ironically, to me, the best thing to come from Security Breach wasn't from the game itself. It was the song the Living Tombstone made. I was surprised by the mixed reception to the vocals and the lyrics because they hit home so hard for me. Yoav's accent, the vocoder, the callbacks to the glory days of FNAF were so intense.
Long time ago it was all for us, fill our wounds with a pound of salt.
I like that the lyrics don't scream FNAF without a visual, that they reflect on the series as a whole without being verbose about it. It evoked a feeling I hadn't felt since it's been so long, and gave me a sense of finality to the series that I hadn't felt since I wrote the precursor to this video 10 years ago.
Now this is your fault. Everything is a problem. There was a poison in the air, despair is an eternal blight.
I get chills every time. The consensus among the community is that Ruin did a much better job in terms of release quality and story coherency, and I have to agree. Although none of the endings feel really conclusive, the pivot to a new antagonist is very welcome. The polish felt much more consistent, and I thought that Cassie's voice actress did an excellent job. Also, Mexies is so fucking cool. What a great name. The fact that we actually got a movie out of this franchise, with more to come, is still surreal to me. A FNAF movie is something that has been talked about ever since the game first blew up. There are so many examples of video game film adaptations that either flop or never come to fruition, so the fact that the FNAF movie actually pulled through is an achievement in and of itself. There's a lot you can say about the film, but suffice to say that it was cool. I don't think it was a masterpiece, but it wasn't bad. The cast is great, the production design is fantastic, and the theme song is very catchy. I love how the restaurant looks with the stained glass. The animatronic suits are so well made, and I have to say, I watched most of the movie with a massive smile on my face. But that's the thing. Is that the reaction I should have had? I think that is what underwhelmed me. Unless you are literally 4 years old, it's not a scary movie in the slightest. And, well, you could argue that obviously it won't be scary if you're a longtime fan, but the movie was, quote, for the fans. They hammered that in over and over again, but what we actually got makes me think that people are beginning to forget what actually drew people into FNAF in the first place. The horror. Yeah, sure, the story is what's keeping people hooked, for better or for worse, but why did people start playing FNAF? What was it that FNAF 1 got praised for? It was how scary it was. And as more games were released, how scary they were was consistently the deciding factor about whether or not the game was viewed as a success. I mean, the reaction to FNAF 3 literally prompted Scott to create FNAF 4 as a result. I can't even claim that I'm a big fan of horror movies, but even I was disappointed by how unscary it was. And because there's this lack of horror, to new people who have not been involved with the community as long, or are even entering it for the first time, the movie just comes across as convoluted. One of the big reasons the movie never felt scary, and what took me out the most, was that the animatronics do not look threatening at all. Don't get me wrong, they look great, but they're not scary. It was really obvious the entire time that it was just actors wearing suits, and suits that look like they weigh about 5 pounds in foam. And obviously, I'm not trying to suggest that they should have had actual robots, or that having actors wear a suit was the wrong way to go. I just think it could have been better. Look at I Am Mother and how they handled Mother. She's also a suit, but that's something you can hardly tell the entire movie. For what it's worth, the story felt at least a little bit more logical than what we've established through the games. Then again, that's a pretty low bar to pass. The actors did a great job, but the writing was mid-tier at best.
Oh my goodness!
There's absolutely no mystery to Vanessa, she just didn't make any sense. It was pretty obvious from the very beginning that she is involved in everything because she makes no effort to pretend like she isn't. Her character just lacks depth. She tells Mike that William Afton is her father, and that's the end of that. There's no lead up, no foreshadowing or hints. It's really more telling rather than showing. 5 out of 10. Also, does nobody notice that Max and all her friends die? Like, it's not addressed at all, and even Aunt Jane seems completely unfazed. And here we are, caught up to the present day. I thought that The Secret of the Mimic was very well done. I really only have positives to say about it. I like that it revolves around new characters at a new location for a new company, and that the characters themselves are expressive and interesting. The story is quite linear and self-contained, meaning that you can put the pieces together with this game alone. And even where the game does tie into the previous games, it does so tastefully and without relying on it for the majority of the plot. I personally find the idea of all these different locations being stacked up on top of each other pretty cool. It's one of those plot points that feels like it may be building up to some larger resolution, so I'm interested in seeing where that goes. It really feels like Steel Wolf found their footing with Ruin and applied everything they've learned to make this game even better.
You're trying to fix me?
I can't fix you.
I want to preface this section by saying that I do not hate Scott for milking the franchise. I have disagreements with some of his beliefs and conduct outside of FNAF, but as it pertains to making the game, I don't blame him. Throughout all his public commentary, one thing is apparent. Scott loves making games. Even when he failed to find success, he persisted until he finally struck gold. Finally, he had found something that he could actually support his family with. And so, of course, Scott didn't plan a franchise-spanning story for a game he didn't expect to succeed. He's quoted as saying this multiple times himself, including the fact that he purposely leaves things open-ended to allow for potential future expansions.
I definitely left a lot of things open-ended, in case I wanted to expand upon them later. I mean, obviously, I did not have the entire story planned out, as I know there's much debate about that on the subreddit.
However, I don't think a lack of planning is excuse enough for a conceited story which holds itself as infallible despite containing contradictory information, misleading the community several times, as well as making changes to known information post-factum. Let's take a look at some examples. In Ultimate Custom Night, Withered Chica says,
I was the first. I have seen everything.
Right. But in Pizzeria Simulator, Henry says that his daughter, who we are explicitly shown to possess the puppet, was the first victim.
A wound first inflicted on me, but then one that I let bleed out to cause all of this.
So, which is it? It can't be both. What is the community supposed to make of that? It leads to a semantic spiral with people grasping at straws. Perhaps Chica meant she was the first of the main five? This is never resolved. Alternatively, take Midnight Motorist in Pizzeria Simulator. Midnight Motorist is perhaps the most elusive and unsolved minigame across the entire series, because it gives a unique glimpse at a critical moment in the story, yet provides almost no tangible information. It is heavily implied that Midnight Motorist takes place immediately after William Afton's murder of Charlie Emily. In the puppet minigame, William drives away in his car in a rainstorm. In Midnight Motorist, William is driving his car in the rain, and the name of the game in the files is Later That Night. One of the key things we learn is that at this point, the crying child is still alive. We know this because we see Mike at the TV, and the only male member of this family, apart from Mike and William, is the crying child. But wait, wasn't the bite of 83, the death of the crying child, the inciting incident? Wasn't it that loss that led to William committing the murders? How can Charlie be the first death in the timeline then? For that matter, Midnight Motorist can't be set in 1983 because we know that the puppet didn't exist yet. Fredbear's Family Diner was the first location, and only featured Fredbear and Spring Bonnie as animatronics. But if this is in the future, then the crying child can't be alive because he died in 1983. Again, this conflict still persists. We can go further, all the way back to FNAF 2. We know that FNAF 2 is a prequel to FNAF 1 by way of it taking place in 1987, while FNAF 1 refers to the bite of 87 in past tense.
They used to be allowed to walk around during the day, too, but then there was the bite of 87. Yeah. It's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe, you know?
Also, the phone guy is still alive, so there's that. Yet the withered animatronics, which become the same characters we see in FNAF 1, look completely different. Is this a retcon? Were they refurbished between the events of this game and the first? Many people lean towards the latter, but there's gaps in that logic as well. Why would Golden Freddy, a disused character, have his suit refurbished? Golden Freddy is an entirely different rabbit hole on his own. Barring the debate over who inhabits his suit, we still don't know if he's Fredbear or not. In FNAF World, there are two separate characters. In UCN, Golden Freddy exists in his FNAF 2 form, yet it's through him that you get the Fredbear jump scare. But in the jump scare, Fredbear takes the appearance of Golden Freddy from FNAF 1. So was it the FNAF 1 designs, then the FNAF 2 Withereds, then back to the FNAF 1 designs? The confusion over the crying child, the fact that there's two purple guys, the visual retcons, this list can go on. But the most infuriating aspect of the plot is that even when Scott acknowledges that it didn't come across as intended, or even that a plot point shouldn't have occurred in the first place, Scott leaves it as is. Why? Throughout everything, this is the most egregious disrespect that the fandom has continued to endure. In FNAF 4, if what was meant to be in the box had changed or left Scott behind, why leave it in the game? If FNAF World shouldn't have tied into the story, why not change that? If Security Breach told the wrong story, why not fix it? At any point in time, any and all of these deficiencies could have been rectified either through a public statement or by modifying the actual game. He could clarify what the intended story beats were, or simply state that the erroneous information should be discarded. This man made the games. Does he not realize he has the power to change them? It's as if the very notion of directly communicating an aspect of the story is sacrilege to him. Stop scrolling! Oh, look at that, I have like a FNAF 2 camera static effect. Makes it more real. Hey guys, Editor Brian here. I've just been listening to my explanation in this part of the video a couple of times, and I feel like I'm still not getting my point across correctly. I'm worried that when people hear me saying these games should be fixed, that they think I'm saying that all of Security Breach needs to be remade, which obviously would be a massive undertaking, and is not what I'm trying to say. FNAF 4, for example, is like 10 years old now. Obviously, Scott is not going to go back and update that. With all of the games that I mentioned, the issues they had came about in the time span of weeks after they released. Like in FNAF 4's case, Scott decided that the box would stay locked during the Halloween update after it released. FNAF World was a flop pretty much as soon as it released, and Security Breach had issues right away as well. In the case of FNAF 4 and the box, if the box stays locked, and if the contents inside it have changed several times, there's no point in keeping it in the game. It serves no purpose. By removing it from the game, you're removing it from the discussion, but by keeping it there to this day, it's still this big question of what is in the box, what's the deal with the box? With FNAF World, the issue was that it tied into the stories of the main games, and in that case, just removed the Fredbear cutscenes. It's an RPG. It already has fights and boss fights. I don't think there's much else you need to do. With Security Breach, the issues run a lot deeper. You know, there are a lot of bugs, and bugs are inexcusable. Like, I shouldn't even need to say this. If there are bugs in a game, you should be updating the game to correct those bugs. The story issues came about because Scott didn't tell the developers making his game the story of the game they were making, which I feel people gloss over way too easily. How does that happen? How is that what it takes to learn that you should be communicating that way?
Because what I was trying to do was I was trying to tell Steel Wool to do specific things throughout the game, put specific items in specific places, have specific characters do certain things, meanwhile not telling them what the story plot was.
Security Breach's story is a whole mess, and I think Scott himself has said that Burntrap wasn't really supposed to be there, at least not in the form that he is in the actual game. Like, Afton isn't supposed to be the villain.
When it comes to Burntrap, originally Burntrap was never supposed to move. He was supposed to just be something you saw in the corners, or like if you were walking past machinery, you might be able to peek in between two things and see him in the corner or propped up against a wall. But realistically, he never moved.
Now, I can't say how the fix for the story would be when it's that disjointed and that bad, but I think there are many ways to clarify it without straight up remaking the game. Like, if Burntrap was supposed to actually be the mimicking Afton, you know, change the eyes on the model or something. And, you know, there's bits throughout the game. You collect the logs, which you can change to be more clear. The whole weird sister location room, I think, can be clarified as well. And it's not like there isn't a precedent for this either, because FNAF World did get updated. When it released and it got the backlash that it did, Scott updated it to have more characters, voice acting, he redid the overworld to be 3D. So it's not like this isn't possible, because Scott has done it himself. Games aren't books or movies. You can update them after they release, and they do get updated all the time. This is not a new concept. My point with this part of the video is that the issues in these games could have been fixed with fairly trivial updates. Don't get me wrong, I understand the mentality of we got this project out, I don't want to go back to it, I want to continue to the next thing. But I think that leaving them as is has really done a lot more harm than good in the context of the story. Anyways, I just wanted to clear that up. Hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. And remember This Comes From Inside from just a few sections ago? The first time I listened to it, I was struck by how the lyrics seemed to be directed at Scott.
Long time ago it was all for us, shall fill our wounds with a pound of salt.
10 years ago, all of this was just one game.
And your reason to justify scars you can't quantify, lock us inside the mold.
But now, with so much confusion and contradiction, what is Scott's solution to a story he can no longer keep up with? He locks it away inside the box.
Now this is your fault. Everything is a problem.
I don't know if this was the Living Tombstone's intent, of course, but the lyrics really do feel quite powerful when you interpret them this way. At this point, it's Scott's fault. Every game introduces more problems to solve, further unraveling the story.
There was a poison in the air, despair is an eternal light. You're losing it all. You've been blinded by stardom.
The games took off more than Scott could have imagined. He was blinded by the attention they got, and instead of writing a story that neatly comes together, he kept repeating what had made the first game so successful. More and more mysteries bolstered only by vague hints, accumulating into what we have today. Scott lost the plot, literally.
You say that you're alone, but we are waiting for you every night. You're mine.
Eventually, it stops becoming storytelling and just becomes selfish. The whole point of these games is to tell a story, which is something you cannot do if you consistently refuse to provide any details that might lead to someone beginning to understand it. That is what is wrong with this franchise, and that is why it lost me after the third game. It insists on constantly creating new questions without ever providing meaningful answers to the existing ones. I thought Nick Rowan summarized things quite well in his review of Sister Location. The Five Nights brand has always crutched on these tropes. Why are the machines evil, or are they just misunderstood? What is the nature of the Freddy's curse, and how exactly does this particular entry fit into the series' larger story and timeline, and on and on. But these tropes can only be played out so many times before they are worn out. The Five Nights series either needs to start answering some of the questions it's set up, or at least find some more interesting ones to ask. Having a well-written plot and characters is arguably the most important part of any media conveying a story. It's what immediately jumps out at you. Characters in a game with annoying dialogue, or a movie with a nonsensical plot. It's why we can bear to watch something with poor visuals if the story is interesting and the characters are charming. No matter how high your production budget is, nobody's going to watch something that has no substance to it. One thing that many don't seem to understand is just how difficult creative writing is. I think that there's a lot of people who assume that writing is just sitting down in front of a Google Doc and typing out what comes to mind, that the plot just happens. And while there are certainly extremely talented writers for whom it almost seems effortless, very rarely does everything fall into place so naturally. There's like 3 drafts, at least 2 rewrites, some chapter gets removed, another gets added, and the ending undergoes like a dozen revisions, if you're lucky. Obviously, I'm generalizing and exaggerating here. Like any creative process, it differs from person to person. The point is that unless you're just naturally gifted, there's work that goes into writing a good story. Back in the day, we had FNAF versus Undertale. Which community was worse, better? Both games had accumulated a massive following online, and so naturally, it led to a pointless rivalry. It's interesting because although both games were very different, what captivated their audiences was the same: the story. I should say that I am by no means the first to draw comparisons between the storytelling in these two games. With both entering the gaming sphere at essentially the same time, and both growing very dedicated fandoms, I think they naturally lend themselves to a certain air of competition. Still, I think there is a point that exists to be made about long-running and connected storylines. As the years went on and more FNAF games were released, it became clear that Scott was trying to present an overarching story that connected all of the games. Again, we know that the plot was not pre-planned and was being developed one game at a time, but it is still apparent that every entry into the core series was meant to somehow fit in with the rest. Although Undertale was originally a standalone title, with the ongoing release of Deltarune, it has ironically become a good comparison. Undertale was released in 2015. In it, you play as a human navigating the monsters underground. It's renowned not just for its writing, but for the art and the music and the quality of the game overall. It's a deep and meaningful experience that takes several hours to fully complete, one that many consider to have been transformative for them by the time they finish. In one part of the game, during an intimate monologue from Sans, a song plays titled, "It's Raining Somewhere Else." It's a somewhat somber ambient track, but given the context it plays in, it's incredibly memorable. Now, having played Undertale, imagine yourself 10 years later playing Chapter 4 of Deltarune. For those out of the loop, Deltarune is Undertale's quote-unquote parallel story. It's a different universe with a completely different plot, but there are many familiar faces and allusions at important connections to Undertale. At this point, you've just experienced the emotional climax of the chapter, and you're finally about to return home to end the day. And then, all of a sudden, you hear this. This song is titled "The Place Where It Rained." If you played Undertale when it first came out, it's been a decade since you first heard that opening chord. When I realized what I was hearing and connected the dots, I was shaken to my very core. It's the realization of how long this has all been planned. A real, tangible connection between the two games. It's been raining here all along. The subject of Where It Rained can hardly be called a mystery. It's the name of one song on the soundtrack, not even something you'd be made aware of in-game. And yet, this moment feels so profound because of the context it takes place in. It provides a very suave and graceful answer to a major aspect of the lore. Are the stories of Undertale and Deltarune connected? They are. And then, you compare this to FNAF. The consistency in the story just isn't there for it to ever have a moment with the same impact. Scott constantly changes his mind about events, characters, and the story in general. Sure, Henry's speech was a great moment, but it doesn't hit quite as hard amidst the myriad of questions it both and succeeds. It patched one hole in the bucket, but when there's 50 others, it's going to leak all the same. FNAF has gotten too big for its own good. In the process of continuously creating new mysteries for the franchise, the story has become diluted. And this begs the question, what story is FNAF trying to tell? What strikes me about the moment in Chapter 4 of Deltarune is how significant it is. The question was substantial. I would argue that most of the open questions of Undertale and Deltarune are like this, with answers that would have direct and important implications on the story. On the contrary, many of the unsolved mysteries of the FNAF franchise seem somewhat irrelevant. Does it really matter knowing who the perpetrator of the Bite of 87 was? Do we need to know why Golden Freddy is a disembodied head in FNAF 2? Would knowing the identity of the Springlock suit in Sister Location really make a difference? None of these questions would impact the core story in a meaningful way. With the ever-growing tally of questions there are, I think the community has become entrapped in this need to know the nuances of every plot element. Chica biting someone instead of Foxy doesn't recontextualize the events of the games. Neither does Mike's being in Funtime Puppet instead of Circus Golden Freddy or whatever. In this habit of pursuing irrelevant minutiae, I think that the fandom has lost sight of the fact that the story of the first 3 games has largely been spelt out. As the proverb goes, good things come in threes. There's something so satisfying about a trilogy. It's tidy and expected, packaged neatly into an organized structure. Maybe that's why some franchises have such a difficult time with the 3rd game. There's this expectation for it to bookend the games before it. FNAF is one of those fortunate occurrences where we do have a 3rd game, and one which does end on a conclusive note. The problem is how many questions it leaves unanswered. What I suggest is that when you consider the first 3 games on their own, and the answers we've learned to the questions they pose, the initial trilogy actually tells a fairly compelling and coherent story. In FNAF 1, we asked 5 main questions. Who was the murderer, and why did he perform the murders at Freddy's? Who was the perpetrator and victim of the Bite of 87? Who is the one saying, "It's me"? Who is and what is the significance of Golden Freddy? And who is the player, Mike Schmidt? Let's take these one at a time. First of all, we can immediately write off the question about the Bite of 87. Like I mentioned earlier, knowing who got bitten and by whom doesn't have an effect on the story. Rather, it's just the fact that it happened at all. Who is the murderer, and why did he perform the murders at Freddy's? The murderer, Purple Guy, is William Afton, one of the co-founders of Freddy's. In FNAF 4, we see the inciting incident for the murders. The crying child, his own son, is injured and ultimately killed by one of the animatronics he ostensibly helped to realize. Although it isn't said explicitly, it can be inferred that William's anger over this incident, especially towards Henry, his founding partner, is what leads him to kill the rest of the children. Who was the one saying, "It's me"? It is my opinion that this question is still unanswered. Candy Bunny suggests in her video on the topic that the phrase "it's me" is an attempt by the captive souls to express their identity, rather than it being attributed to a specific character. I think this is a great interpretation, but I'm hesitant to call this or other interpretations as conclusive, given how vague the appearances of "it's me" are, and how little information there is surrounding it. We'll revisit this and other unanswered questions later. Who is and what is the significance of Golden Freddy? Golden Freddy is possessed by the spirit of the 5th child involved in the missing children incident, and the final victim going by the order in the FNAF 2 minigame. Golden Freddy, or rather the spirit that haunts him, is referred to be the one you should not have killed by other characters in UCN. They are the final subject of the Happiest Day minigame in FNAF 3, and along with the moniker they receive in UCN, are implied to have had a particularly tragic death. Many people in the community speculate over whether the spirit is Cassidy, or Andrew, Crying Child, or some combination of the 3. But as far as I'm concerned, the games intentionally leave this as ambiguous. Again, much like with the Bite of 87, knowing the detail of the name serves no greater purpose. Who is Mike Schmidt? Mike Schmidt is Michael Afton, the older son of William Afton. Michael is shown to be remorseful for his actions following his brother's death, and it is implied that he sought employment at Freddy's under a pseudonym as a way to not only atone for his guilt, but for the actions of his father as well. Even barring the hints in the survival logbook, this is corroborated by the sticker on the hand unit referring to the player as Mike, whom we know to be Michael Afton for a fact. In FNAF 2, there were 10 new questions. Are the toy animatronics malfunctioning, or are they haunted as well? How many kids were killed in total? What was the previous location that the withered animatronics were from? What was and what happened to Fredbear's family diner? Why is Golden Freddy's head severed? Who are the players, Jeremy Fitzgerald and Fritz Smith? What is the yellow suit that Phone Guy mentions? Who is the crying child? Who is and what is the significance of the puppet? And who are and what is the significance of Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie? Two of these are, in my opinion, not worth asking. I don't think knowing where the withered animatronics were from would actually reveal anything. I know it's tempting to know the exact opening and closing dates and restaurant number to form some kind of ultimate timeline, but that wouldn't change anything in the story. All that we really need to know is that there was a previous location at all. Similarly, the fact that Golden Freddy's head is severed has no bearing on anything. I've seen people reading quite heavily into this, even as a way to substantiate the theory that Golden Freddy is possessed by multiple souls, but I think this is grasping at straws. This is a franchise where there are haunted, sentient animatronic robots, where the environment can change at random and ghostly apparitions are commonplace. It's a paranormal character behaving paranormally, and knowing the exact mechanism behind or reason for the paranormal activity is pointless. Again, the key takeaway is Golden Freddy's existence as a character. If we look at the list of the remaining 8 questions, the first 2 go hand in hand. Are the toy animatronics malfunctioning, or are they haunted as well? How many kids were killed in total? William Afton killed 6 kids. Those victims are those which possess the characters that antagonize you during the gameplay. The puppet, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Golden Freddy. We know that it is these 6 because they are the only ones the games ever mention, and it emphasizes their deaths several times. They're seen in FNAF 2's Give Gifts, Give Life minigame. They're seen in FNAF 3 during Happiest Day. The 6 gravestones are seen in one of the endings for Pizzeria Simulator. They're seen again in Security Breach, and a 3rd time in Help Wanted 2. The story revolves around these 6 victims, and because there are never shown to be more, it is safe to say that the toy animatronics are not haunted. What was and what happened to Fredbear's Family Diner? Fredbear's Family Diner was the very first Freddy's location, before it rebranded into Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Fredbear's is the epicenter of the story, where the Bite of 83 killed William Afton's younger son. It's here where it all began, what led to the murders and where all the classic characters originated. Fredbear's was presumably closed after the Bite of 83, and it is implied to have been the same location that the FNAF 2 pizzeria later reopens in. Who are the players, Jeremy Fitzgerald and Fritz Smith? Jeremy, the character you play as during the first 6 nights, is heavily implied to be the victim of the Bite of 87. We dismissed the question of who was the victim earlier, and I should reiterate that I stand by my assertion that those details are not important. However, those details also happen to overlap with Jeremy's identity. We know that the game takes place in 1987 from the date on the paycheck, and since the restaurant is open, it can be inferred that the bite hasn't happened yet. The dialogue from Phone Guy emphasizes the increasingly erratic nature of the animatronics, as well as the growing sense of unease surrounding the establishment. This, combined with the Night 6 dialogue that Jeremy is to take the day shift in the morning, and the not-so-subtle instruction to stay close to the animatronics, leads to the reasonable conclusion that he was the bite victim.
Hello. What on earth are you doing there? Didn't you get the memo? The place is closed down, at least for a while. Someone used one of the suits. Now none of them are acting right. We have one more event scheduled for tomorrow, a birthday. You'll be on day shift. Wear your uniform. Stay close to the animatronics and make sure they don't hurt anyone, okay? When the place eventually opens again, I'll probably take the night shift myself. Okay, good night and good luck.
Fritz Smith, on the other hand, the character we play as on Night 7, is less clear. The reasons for termination on the pink slip seem to imply that you are playing as Michael Afton, who was fired for similar reasons in FNAF 1, and I think this isn't a far-fetched conclusion. However, it's also the only evidence for this interpretation, and when combined with the implications of both Jeremy and Fritz's names on the gravestones, I think it makes drawing any conclusions far less definitive. Similarly to the meaning of "it's me," I think it is safe to label Fritz's identity as unsolved. What is the yellow suit that Phone Guy mentions?
Someone used one of the suits. We had a spare in the back, a yellow one. Someone used it.
The spare suit was Springtrap. We learn through both FNAF 3 and 4 that spring-lock suits were originally used by Fredbear's Family Diner to allow being worn by staff performers. This means that Golden Freddy, who is not a spring-lock animatronic, could not be worn by a person. Although it's known that there was a Fredbear suit as well, only the Spring Bonnie suit is shown to still exist through its appearance in FNAF 3. It's this suit which is shown to be used time and time again by William Afton to commit his crimes, and which ultimately ends up killing him. Its usage around the spirits of the haunted animatronics, those killed by William in the very same suit, also explains their sudden erratic behavior. The next two questions also happen to be correlated. Who is the crying child? Who is and what is the significance of the puppet? The crying child in the Take Cake to the Children minigame is Charlie Emily, the daughter of Henry Emily. She is killed by William Afton after being locked out of the restaurant and goes on to possess the puppet, as evidenced by the puppet jump scare at the end of the minigame and by the security puppet minigame in Pizzeria Simulator. The significance of the puppet is twofold. For one, Charlie is established as William's first victim. It was the first murder in the series of 6 that would ultimately take place. This is confirmed by Henry's speech in Pizzeria Simulator's Insanity ending.
A wound first inflicted on me, but then one that I let bleed out to cause all of this.
For 2, the puppet is shown to act as a guide for the souls. During his ending speech, Henry describes his daughter as a nurturing person who cares for others.
My daughter, if you can hear me, I knew you would return as well. It's in your nature to protect the innocent. I'm sorry that on that day, the day you were shut out and left to die, no one was there to lift you up into their arms, the way you lifted others into yours.
As the puppet, Charlie guides the children's spirits to the animatronics, giving them the gift of life once again. And, as we see during Happiest Day, it's also through the puppet that the souls can finally be put to rest. The puppet acts almost like a caregiver to the spirits, and it is precisely because of the puppet's actions that the events of the games take place. Finally, there's FNAF 3. At last, there was FNAF 3. FNAF 3 had 2 questions. Who is the player, and what is the sister location mentioned by Phone Guy? Who is the player? The security guard in FNAF 3 is Michael Afton. We know this from the end of Sister Location. Michael's monologue to William ends with him declaring,
"I'm going to come find you,"
as the camera pans across the burnt remains of Fazbear's Fright, followed by Springtrap suddenly sitting up. It heavily implies that what we are seeing is the result of Michael finding his father, and that he had taken the job of security guard once again. What is the sister location mentioned by Phone Guy? This one was also answered by, well, Sister Location. We learn about the location in the game with that very name. It's Circus Baby's Pizza World. Circus Baby even mentions the Springlock suits in some of her dialogue, confirming that they were in use at Pizza World before the restaurant closed.
You're inside something that came from my old pizzeria. I don't think it was ever used. At least not the way it was meant to be used.
What?
Too dangerous. It's just big enough for one person to fit inside. I'd recommend that you keep the spring locks wound up. You don't want them to get too loose. Trust me.
There's one more question from FNAF 2 some of you may have noticed I skipped. Who are and what is the significance of Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie? Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie are characters first introduced in FNAF 2. They play a key role in FNAF 3's minigames and go on to appear in varying capacities throughout the rest of the franchise. Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie are both manifestations of agony. Agony is a concept from the books similar to Remnant, capable of giving full life to otherwise inanimate objects What could be more tragic than the death of an innocent child? Their cries for help as their lives are taken, calling out for their mother and father, wailing for somebody, anybody, but nobody can hear them. The torture they must have felt, so searing and unbearable that their soul is forced from their bodies. The malice is unspeakable. The suffering is unimaginable. An act so utterly wicked and vile that the very concept of that same evil took on a physical form. A pain so great that you could see it with your own eyes. At the core of Five Nights at Freddy's is this horrendous tragedy. Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie are, in my opinion, one of the most striking and underrepresented parts of this story. The idea of an emotion so powerful that it manifests physically is chilling. Shadow Freddy is the manifestation of William's evil. In FNAF 3, it's him who guides the animatronics back to William to be torn apart yet again.
But he led them there, again. He overpowered them, again. And he robbed them of the only thing that they had, again.
Shadow Bonnie is the other side of the same coin. We see him in the minigame navigating the purgatories of the unbound souls. Guided by them, and in the context of the game, Bonnie travels through time and space to allow the victims to finally rest. He is a manifestation of their pain. Both of these characters are born of agony. Freddy is the cause, and Bonnie is the effect. In many ways, they represent the way in which suffering can spread. William's agony over the loss of his son directly leads to the killings he performs. We see the shadows in FNAF 2, presumably immediately after the missing children incident, when the pain is still fresh. There is something almost cosmically horrific about these two characters, like shepherds from another realm. It's so easy to get caught up in the logistics of trying to beat the clock or the specifics of when an event took place that you can almost forget the tragedy behind it. But every now and then, when you least expect it, you'll see a shadow from the corner of your eye. Bonnie and Freddy are there, counterparts of each other, forever following in the wake of the tragedy, wherever it may take them. It's one of the few plot points that I think should remain unwritten. To me, Shadow Bonnie and Shadow Freddy represent the peak of what made the FNAF mystery so alluring. And that's the thing, having mysteries isn't a bad thing. I think any good piece of media will answer just enough to make you satisfied, but leave enough questions to keep you thinking. It's me, Fritz Smith, and the intricacies of the shadows. These are important questions, but even without them, we can already piece so much together. Perhaps the respective meanings of Shadow Bonnie and Shadow Freddy could have been communicated better in the trilogy by visual means. But I think their obscure nature is what makes them so special. Their significance shouldn't be spelled out. It's their obscurity that maintains their otherworldly nature, and is ultimately what allows their mythos to live on. Without adequately providing answers, FNAF gets the balance to this equation fundamentally wrong. It took 6+ games and multiple books to arrive at these conclusions for the trilogy when they should have been there already. Contrary to popular belief, the devil is not in the details when it comes to FNAF. It's in the big picture. What is the main idea being insinuated or implied? When we combine the answers to the questions we asked with this rationale, the story of the first trilogy suddenly begins to make a lot more sense. William Afton is a father, a businessman, and an engineer. He partners with Henry Emily to open a new restaurant, Fredbear's Family Diner. Fredbear's claim to fame is its animatronic characters, which can be programmed to sing and dance, providing entertainment to patrons of the pizzeria. But on one day in 1983, things take a turn for the worse. William's youngest son is fatally injured by Fredbear after a prank by his oldest son, Michael. In an attempt to save face, the diner rebrands to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, replacing Fredbear and Spring Bonnie with 5 new characters: Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and the puppet. But William is devastated. Enraged, William takes it out on the man who had designed the very robot that killed his son, Henry Emily. In an act of cold blood, William kills Henry's daughter, Charlie. Now, Henry would know what that pain felt like. Now with 2 deaths at one location, the restaurant is forced to close, but not before Henry kicks William out of the business. He had become suspicious of him, but this only makes things worse. William can't let it go, and when the restaurant reopens years later, he does everything he can to make sure it won't succeed without him. He kills 5 more children by luring them away with the Spring Bonnie suit that had been set aside, stuffing them into the old animatronics. He tampers with the facial recognition of the redesigned characters, a feature that had been meant to improve safety. But unbeknownst to neither William nor Henry, Charlie's spirit had refused to move on. As the puppet, she helps the 5 other children the only way she can, by allowing their spirits to inhabit the same characters they had been forced into: Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. But the 5th victim, killed at their own birthday party, what should have been their happiest day, William used a suit that only he could have known about. Golden Freddy, sitting in the back near Spring Bonnie. Just a few weeks after opening, the pizzeria is forced to close once again. The malfunctioning animatronics had bitten off the frontal lobe of a newly transferred day guard, becoming known as the Bite of 87 and the final nail in the coffin for this restaurant. As the years pass, the pain associated with the pizza chain never leaves Michael. Whether it was to confront his guilt or out of a suspicion towards his father, Michael takes a job as a night guard. But he can't go by his real identity. The Afton name has been banished from the franchise. As Mike Schmidt, Michael spends a week at the new Freddy's. He sees with his own eyes that the animatronics are, in fact, alive. He knows what his father has done. Struggling to stay open after the repeated incidents, the final Freddy's location closes for good. But it still isn't enough for William. They're still in there, even though they should be dead. It's like they're taunting him, refusing to give in to his actions. William enters the shuttered restaurant and dismantles the animatronics one by one. But his plan backfires. With their animatronic bodies destroyed, the unbound spirits confront William directly. Startled, he seeks refuge in the same suit that he had used to overpower them. Old and neglected from years of sitting in the safe room, the spring locks inside Spring Bonnie simultaneously fail, killing William. It isn't until decades later that the now rotting and decrepit suit is found by Fazbear's Fright, a new horror attraction capitalizing on the history of the Freddy's franchise. The children's unbound spirits, still without closure, are unable to move on. And they're not the only ones. William may have died, but his spirit clings to Springtrap, the same fate he had condemned his victims to. It's here where Michael returns. He burns the building down and himself with it, ending the chain of suffering that he had started once and for all. I should make it abundantly clear that I am by no means trying to imply that this is the correct or perfectly canon interpretation of the story. At this point, I don't think it's actually possible to tie all the games together without issue. Scott claims that there are no plot holes, but the contradictions we covered are just the tip of the iceberg. FNAF 2 takes place in the summer according to Phone Guy, but the paychecks are dated November. The missing children incident is shown to occur in the safe room, across the restaurant, and in Pirate's Cove. The child in Take Cake to the Children is addressed as a male by the Save Him letters, despite Charlie being a girl. And this is just the first 3 games. You cannot get stuck in the details. There is no way to make sense of these games otherwise. But when you zoom out, you see the big picture. FNAF is the story of a family tragedy. It explores two sides of the same coin, the grief that changes William for the worse, and the guilt that changes Michael for the better. And for what it's worth, I think this is a very solid story. There's a tragic inciting incident, characters who undergo transformative arcs, a resolution, and a plethora of conflict along the way. The pieces are there, but they weren't when they needed to be. FNAF drip-fed the community the answers over a seemingly endless supply of games and additional media, all the while undermining the foundation on which they sat upon. Think of the amount of questions we posed for the first 3 games and their significance to the fundamental elements of the story. Imagine then, with those mysteries in mind, experiencing FNAF 4 for the first time. Being presented with a literal locked box with not only the answers to those questions, but the new ones introduced by this very game, and having it ripped away at the very last second. By taking away the closure it could have offered, the box further enabled FNAF to become the tangled mess it is now. When I look back on all of these games, what strikes me is how much it feels like there's a story connecting everything. And it's not hidden away either, it's a big part of the gameplay. You hear it in the nightly calls from Phone Guy, you see it in the death minigames, and you experience it in the cutscenes. The story feels like it's practically reaching out to you, and it's because there's no definitive answer despite that notion that so many in the community have been drawn in. Throughout all of this, since day one, it's been the community that has grown FNAF into what it is. I mean, I've been around here since Bonzi Bonnie, and somehow the community always finds a new way to impress me. The talent, love, and creativity that members of this fandom put into their work is unfathomable. Whether it's filling in blanks in the story, appreciation of it, or something entirely new born out of inspiration, the devotion that the community has towards the franchise is remarkable. FNAF created mascot horror, what is now a genre-dominating subset of games born from the excitement that surrounded Freddy's. And when I look at the imprint that FNAF has left and the dedication of the community around it, I can't help but feel like that community has been cheated. In Ultimate Custom Night, Scott uses Mr. Hippo as a way to communicate some of his feelings on the story to the player base.
Orville, not every story has to have significance, you know? Sometimes a story is just a story. If you try to read into every little thing and find meaning in everything anyone says, you'll just drive yourself crazy. I had a friend who...
To me, this is Scott acknowledging that not everything in the games does fit together, and I think it supports the idea that you have to look at the bigger picture. I don't disagree with him either, that sometimes a story is just a story, but you can't have it both ways. Either the game is just a game, or the game is part of a larger narrative. And in the case of FNAF, it's been very obvious that the latter was true, whether Scott ended up regretting this or not. I don't blame Scott for milking the franchise, but it is his fault that the story became what it is. I don't think he can wave off the deficiencies of the franchise like this. Sure, maybe not all of the pieces fit together, but then why keep saying that they do? Scott insists that there are no plot holes, even when we know that there are. He says that the pieces are there, even when we know they weren't laid out in advance. When the story is, in my opinion, the driving force behind the franchise, you don't get to trivialize the same issues you insist are not there. For whatever reason, despite every new game just adding to the confusion, Scott insisted on the idea that the plot was airtight. This arrogance, in my opinion, is what led to a growing portion of the fanbase becoming increasingly frustrated with the franchise. How many times can you contradict yourself? How many silent retcons can you make before the claim that it's the player's fault for not understanding the story starts to become insulting? It's a disrespect of the very same community that is enabling your product to be viable. The franchise has strung the community along with the release of every new game with the promise that there is an answer, but it never bothers to make that answer known. My interpretation is not canon by any means, but it grants me that sense of closure that I had been yearning for all these years. I think that's something the community has deserved for a long time. Despite everything, I wouldn't be making this video if there wasn't part of me still passionate about the franchise that had captivated me 10 years ago. If you're one of my subscribers watching this right now, you're probably fucking bewildered as to why of all people, a City Skylines YouTuber is making a video essay on FNAF. But what you need to understand is, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for these games. It was FNAF, of all things, that got me into seriously making videos, as horrible as they were. My channel name started as a reference to my Reddit account, something I only made to interact with the FNAF subreddit. I owe so much to this franchise and its community, and as convoluted as its story became, 10 years later, I'm still here.